This video is part of the PMD Pro 2 series on project management tools. This session is on the topic of risk, especially how the risk register can be better used as a tool in project management. These sessions are designed for participants who have completed the Project Management for Development Professionals PMD Pro Level 1 course and passed the examination, and who are now studying for PMD Pro Level 2. The emphasis being made in this series on PM tools is to assist with the use of project management tools as a way to promote further transfer of learning with the intention of improving performance and improving the contributions toward the desired humanitarian impacts. We'll begin this video with a slide that links to another project management tools video on the topic of assumptions. The video on using assumptions as a PM tool gave a resounding yes to the question on this slide. The project manager can turn almost every assumption, as those that you see on this slide, into a negative and use them to populate the risk register. By turning each assumption into a negative, another tool, the risk register, is automatically launched and will be ready to be managed. Just to be completely sure that you understand the linkage between assumptions in the log frame and the beginning of the risk register, I'd like to start by asking a question. Can you turn this assumption into a risk statement? Prices for purchased commodities will remain stable over the duration of the project. I'll pause while you do that. One negative conversion that becomes a risk would read this way: purchased commodity prices could occur during implementation, resulting in increased expenditures and/or a reduction in project activities and outputs. I'd like you to try one more example just to be 100% sure you understand the connection and the transformation process. Turn this assumption into a risk. The District Forestry Service will not transfer the newly trained officers prior to project completion. I'll pause while you reflect on this. One risk statement that could be associated with this assumption after the conversion would be the Director of the District Forestry Service will transfer officers soon after completion of training. This is an example of a risk that needs to be managed. I'm sure some of you have already thought about the question on this slide. Besides adding negative assumptions, how do you identify risk? Risk identification can involve the use of numerous assessment tools. Some of the same tools that are used for overall project assessment and analysis as you've been reading about in the PMD Pro guide. The same ones that are used during the identification and design phase can also be used for risk identification and analysis. I've listed some well-known methods such as brainstorming, interviewing, and surveys just for your attention. You can use all of these. Just make sure that you pay attention to including full and active participation, using skilled techniques, and using mixed methods, both qualitative and quantitative. I'll mention three other assessment tools, and there are many, many more that can be used to populate the risk register. The first one that I'll talk about is called the Delphi technique. This involves an iterative process, usually with subject matter experts, or it could be with others who are well informed about the project that's being planned. First, step is that the facilitator of the Delphi process solicits or asks for initial responses from the experts, the written responses. Then after collecting them, these responses are circulated anonymously without any names or identification to the whole group of experts. Each expert is then asked to review all of the contributions, read what they've gotten from the other experts, and then based upon what they've written and what they've read from others to revise their own contribution. A consensus is likely to be formed according to those who've experienced this Delphi process by the end of it. Another tool is called force field analysis, which is most commonly used to assist with change management, but like all tools can be adapted for other needs like identifying risk. Force field analysis shows the change desired in the middle and then the driving forces for positive change and the restraining forces pushing against the change. Risk would then be the circumstances that contribute to the most significant forces. This simple example shows that there are forces pushing in favor of a community awareness campaign, like stakeholder passion, donor commitment, and cooperation from local organizations. And there also are forces pushing against the awareness campaign, like mishandling of money, lack of cooperation by authorities, and disruption by the opposition. Several risks could be identified using this tool. Now, here's a risk identification tool that you will likely figure out very quickly based upon your knowledge of the work breakdown structure tool that you learned about in PMD Pro 1. A risk breakdown structure is a hierarchical framework of potential risk to a project, and it should be both comprehensive and detailed, just like the WBS. An RBS can be developed across the whole project, or it can be done for a work package or even an activity. The example shown on this slide is neither detailed nor comprehensive, but hopefully it will give you an idea of how the tool might be used. Every project has technical and organizational risk. We could also add other categories such as internal risk, external risk, financial risk, human resources risk, etc., etc. Each of these categories in turn, such as technical risk, can be broken down into more detailed subcategories. So technical risk can be broken down into equipment, quality, and lots of other subcategories. The purpose for all of these tools is to get as many of the risk into the risk register so that they can potentially be managed as part of the project control process. As you have read in the PMD Pro Guide and already learned in the PMD Pro 1 course, the risk register can be adapted to the needs of each project. However, each risk register should contain these minimum components. First of all, a detailed identification and description of the issue, problem, or complaint. Secondly, an indication of the relative priority of each risk so that the resources can be allocated to those with the highest priority. Third, a plan for managing each risk on the register, and that could be mitigation, transference, avoidance, or acceptance. And then fourthly, assignment of roles and responsibilities. This can be done simply by identifying the owner of the problem, or in a more complex way by using a tool such as RACI or RACI. RACI is a topic of another PM Tools video if you'd like to know more about that. This is an example of a simple risk register without the action plan. It has both qualitative descriptions, low, medium, high, and numbers 1 through 10. These are designed to make comparison and prioritization of the risk easier. Now, a risk register can be kept in a simple diary, a logbook, or it can be put onto a computer using software such as Microsoft Word or Excel, or it can just be done on a flip chart or a set of flip charts. You can also use more sophisticated project management applications like Microsoft Project, and there actually are hundreds of those available. From the commercial sector, just do a little bit of Googling. There are columns in the matrix. First is a description of the risk, and I've put the risk that I mentioned earlier about commodity prices increasing and causing over expenditure or reduction in scope. And look at the two dimensions related to probability, how likely is it to happen, and impact. What would be the damage done if it did happen? How bad would it be if this risk were to become a reality, if it were to become an issue? We set a scale, qualitative scale of low, medium, high, and a numeric scale of 1 to 10, with number 1 being the lowest possible probability, lowest impact, and 10 being the highest probability or highest impact. Now, a key or an explanation of what these categories mean would be helpful. I haven't done this on this slide, but that's something that you might want to consider. Now, the team who did this chose 3 as the probability for this risk happening, which is relatively low, but there's still a chance. If it does happen, though, it's going to be pretty severe, so they gave it an 8, which is high. In the next column is the composite score. And again, there are 2 ways of doing this. One is just to assign low, medium, high. In this case, the combination of low and high is medium. The other is to add the 2 numbers together. 3 plus 8 equals 11, and divide by 2, and you'll get 5.5. It's essential to assign someone then to the roles and responsibilities, or several people if you're using a RASI in place of this column. Then you'll need to plan some actions, and I haven't filled that column in on this slide, and so I'd like for you to think of what would some actions be that could manage this particular risk, and I'll pause while you do that now. Here are some possibilities that I thought about, and you could have others. The project manager could look for alternative suppliers if existing suppliers increase the prices. They could agree before they begin the project with vendors on forward pricing to lock in the prices. Or if the pricing increase happens, then they might have to decrease the scope that they're trying to accomplish in the project. The third and last is probably the least preferred action, since it actually reduces the overall impact or effectiveness of the project. Now, in this slide, I've added a second risk in order to show you how you can use multiple risk in a comparative way. The risk that we've identified on the earlier slide was that the director of District Forest Service decides to transfer officers to other projects immediately after completing the project training. The people who prepared this risk register said that it's mid-level probability, or number 5, level 5. However, they said if the risk does happen, the transfers do take place, that's going to be really bad. So they gave that a number 9, or high. As you can see from the ranking, the second risk is probably the one that needs priority attention. Take a look at the action plans for the second issue. They want to secure written assurances from the district so that the trained staff members stay for the life of the project, or they want to train extra staff to compensate for the transfer. These would both be mitigation strategies that involve contingencies or alternatives in case the risk gets triggered. Note also that some of the recommended actions might require availability of additional funds, especially training extra staff. This is why most project budgets contain a certain amount of undesignated or reserve funds. On the screen now, you'll see a set of risks that have been entered into a register. There are 3 risks. First, vendors may delay in delivering. Second, high mileage project vehicles could suffer major breakage. Third, women and children may not be able to participate because of local cultural traditions. I've already given probabilities for each and the potential impact. We've assigned an owner to each of these. There are 2 columns with cells that are yellow and have been left blank. First, do the composite scoring or ranking using one or both of the methods that I showed you. Then do the ranking, which is the highest priority, number 1, to number 3, lowest priority for management. Don't fill in the actions just yet. I'll have you do that a bit later. I'll pause now. The mean scores are 6.5, 3, and 6. You can see that the first issue is the number 1 priority for management. Then we have the second priority at the bottom, the third issue. Now, while all 3 might need to be managed, the team now has a priority for proceeding. Now that the relative priority has been determined, planning for managing the issues can begin. Take a look at the first issue on this register, the vendor risk, and brainstorm some actions to mitigate, avoid, transfer, or accept this risk. I'll pause while you think about what you might put into this cell. For the first risk, some of the management actions might include identifying alternate vendors, screening vendors to identify those with on-time delivery history, or negotiating a penalty for late delivery. On the problem with the high mileage vehicles, a manager could simply replace the vehicles. He or she could stockpile spare parts and hire mechanics so that they're ready to fix the problems, or to hire outside private vehicles when necessary because of the breakages. The problem with women and children not being able to participate because of local traditions could be managed by having the management team relocate the project to another area where participation is allowed. They could ask for a precondition that allows women and children to participate in the project, or they could conduct an awareness campaign on the importance of participation as part of the project plan. Read and think about this question. Why consider the interrelationships between risks on the risk register? Look at the sample risk on this screen and reflect on how they are interrelated. I'll pause here. Interrelationship is where individual risks change, become more or less severe when they happen together or in close proximity. For example, using this information that's on the screen, if vendors delay in purchase and or delivery of new vehicles, then the project will be forced to use its existing high mileage vehicles. Another is when the high mileage vehicles break down, the project staff won't be able to visit communities to acquire sufficient understanding of local cultural traditions. That's an example of all 3 risks interacting that could potentially, in its worst case scenario, even kill the project. As you have learned in the PMD Pro guide and the PMD Pro 1 course, the risk register is not written during the setup phase and then placed in a file or left on the shelf. No, the risk register must be a living document that is monitored and changed as needed during implementation. So there are 4 reasons to monitor the risk. First, And the most obvious is to monitor for tracking the identified risk, as some will change over the life of a project. There's a common saying that the only thing that is constant is change. Second, while risk management will be deployed, it's not likely to eliminate all the risk. Some risk will remain. That's why we call it residual risk in project management. Third, it's important to identify new risks that were not known during the planning phase. And finally, those responsible for executing risk management must be monitored for accountability. Before I conclude this project management tools video, give this final question some thought. What are the differences between assumption, risk, and issue? I'll pause while you formulate your answers. An assumption is a positive statement that is identified in order to complete the cause and effect of the logic in the log frame. A risk is a possibility that's been identified so that it can be managed. It's something that could happen in the future. A risk is usually negative. When a risk becomes a reality and is happening, then it's called an issue. This concludes the video on the topic of risk and the risk register tool. If anything was not clear, then refer back to the PMD Pro guide. If further clarifications or help is needed, then be sure to seek out those within your organization and networks with advanced knowledge and experience in project management, and also continue to be more and more of a self-directed and lifelong learner.